You can find all the deck lists in the video and more at the link in the description down below. Let's get started. This weekend gave us 3 more Pioneer challenges to pick over, so let's not hesitate and recap what won, what looked good, and what spice our chefs added to the metagame this weekend. Saturday's 48-person challenge saw a deck that hasn't been around the top of the Pioneer tables for a little while wind up taking it all in the finals. First place was that deck, a Quintorius Combo. Second place was the Dimir Bounce deck that's been popping up and literally bouncing around pretty much everywhere in the format. Third and fifth place were 2 different flavors of Prowess, third place being Rakdos, and then fifth place going back to the basics with Gruul Prowess. Fourth place did see Enigmatic Incarnation as another 5-color deck that has been doing very well in this format so far. Sixth place was the ever-present Rakdos Demons. Seventh was the Green Devotion deck, which has been popping up in force, and 8th place again was Rakdos Prowess. Now that first place challenge winning deck Quintorius Combo hasn't been discovered in the top of the Pioneer charts for quite some time. The deck looks to utilize some larger than life mono ramp cards such as Spinewood's Armadillo, Beanstalk Giant, and Greater Tanuki by taking advantage of their large converted mana cost so that you don't have your Quintorius canned coming into play ASAP and discovering into a random mana ramp spell. But instead, when you discover 4 with Quint's -3 ability, there are only 2 legal targets in your entire deck: Spark Double and Release to the Wind, which can both copy or replay Quintorius, proccing the passive on the Planeswalker to drain 2 damage of life. Keeping Spark Double on the battlefield means that you can stack this effect and killing the opponent as soon as it resolves basically. It's pretty much a deterministic kill. The rest of the deck winds up taking advantage of things like Keruga the Macro Sage as a companion, and playing giant things like Trumpeting Carnosaur to discover and to clone effects or the Combo Walker itself, while potentially removing smaller threats or just ending the game itself. Ever have 2 Carnosaurs on the battlefield? It's pretty much lights out from that point forward. Now, the sideboard is where the deck gets more interesting, where there are copies of good cards like Dragonlord Dramoka or an entire playset of Thought Distortions, but also a game plan that can utilize Garuda, Doom of Depths, as either a card to be included in the main deck naturally or a swappable companion. Now, by keeping Keruga in the sideboard and removing the Virtue of Persistence, the Release the Winds, and Quintorius themselves, Garuda is now a legal companion for our all-even cost deck. Now, this allows you to jump the curve with your ramp package and then reanimate something big from the graveyard when Garuda hits. Now, granted, you're probably just putting Garuda in your main deck and keeping your combo in, even if you sideboard the combo out, since Keruga is a legal companion in every configuration of the deck, and putting Garuda in the main deck just gives you a second angle of attack to kind of coincide with your combo plan. Familiar name to Moto players, Hamuda took the green version of Prowess deck into the top 8, which wouldn't have been that shocking if this was either Standard or Pioneer a few months ago. However, in the time that since then, Rakdos version of the deck has the ability to fling mice at people's faces and has gotten to be the most popular and usually powerful choice of the Prowess deck to play. But this Gruul deck was extremely similar to the Standard version, save for a few upgrades, most of which were in the mana base, like Stomping Ground. Also, the inclusion of 2 Mutavaults also gave more mice to the deck to target with Manifold Mouse, while Kumano Faces Kakazan and Reckless Rage are the only 2 changes in the non-land card package. Unlike most of these Standard versions, Hamuda opted to leave out the Questing Druids from the main deck and keep them in the sideboard, along some better options like Unlicensed Tourist and Hazret the Fervent to sideboard into rather than just Paw Patch Recruits. Now, Sunday morning's challenge also had 48 players with a very demonic top 8, but not a demonic winner. No, instead, in first place, we had the Green Devotion deck finally taking a challenge home for the first time in a few weekends. And as I mentioned, a lot of Demons decks in second, third, and sixth place, seeing the Rakdos version of the deck. Although Dimir had an interesting Demon hybrid deck we'll talk about later in fifth place. It also wound up having the Bounce deck take fourth place and seventh place overall, which left eighth place to yet another Rakdos deck, Rakdos Prowess. So a pretty condensed top 8 with a random green deck taking the entire tournament. Now, after talking about it for a couple of weeks, we finally see one of the green devotion lists win one of these Pioneer challenges. But the deck is really more of a product of like right place, right time with the evolving metagame, more than the fact that the deck is trying to do anything different or utilize a bunch of new cards to do so. The decks have mostly forgone the ley line of the guild pack strategy and now rely on just the 8 mana elves for their opening plays, and then are still looking to leverage Kiora Behemoth Beckoner and everybody's favorite land to hate in Pioneer, Nykthos Shrine to Nyx, to generate a ton of mana off of Devotion, play out a lot of cards thanks to Kiora's Draw Trigger and Storm the Festival, and then transform a found Ulvenwald oddity and literally run over the competition. Now, Monstrous Emergence is the newest card in these lists, mainly being a solid removal spell for the plethora of pump and mid-range grinds that are putting out larger threats earlier than ever, but the fact that there are more and more mid-range decks dropping their hand disruption to deal with the aggro decks now means that the green decks are able to play things out, suffer through maybe a couple of removal spells in the early game, but it doesn't really matter as long as they get to cast their spells, refresh their hand, and nobody is targeting their Nykthos on the battlefield, any sort of Field of Ruin effects right now, so they're just free to go ahead and combo to their heart's desire. Now, the other interesting deck from this top 8 is the 5th place take on Merfolk, capitalizing on a bunch of different Dimir synergies in order to do so. Now, we're no longer looking at the Deeproot Pilgrimage combo kill style of Merfolk deck when we're looking at this list. Instead, we trade the green for black to gain access to one of the most popular synergies currently floating around in Paper Magic, Flood Pitch Drowner and Kaito Bane of Nightmares. Now, the potentially better Merfolk Trickster taps things down just as well in Pioneer as it does in Standard, and opens up a bunch of ninjutsu shenanigans with Kaito and Moon Circuit Hacker to give the deck a little bit of extra grind. Mockingbird becomes a copy of cards like Silvergill Adept or Voldalin Hexcatcher, try saying that 5 times fast, while the fact that the Merfolk deck utilizes 4 Mutavaults to allow for the pilot Tarkhan Mag to shove 4 Unholy Annex without fear to keep the value train rolling. Of course, shout out to yet another Merfolk hiding out in the sideboard with 2 copies of Tishana's Tidebinder. Sunday afternoon's 51 player challenge saw the kind of greatest hits of the oldies of Pioneer continue going, as another popular Pioneer deck rose from the ashes to take back a top spot for what seems like the first time in far too long, since we talk about the deck a ton still. Yeah, first place wound up going to Izzet Phoenix, while second place was again the Dimir bounce deck, so continuing to put up a bunch of top 8 performances this weekend. Third place, of course, was the ever-present Rakdos Demons, and then fourth place we saw that Gruul Prowess deck pop back up here. Fifth place was a fun deck called a mono Red THUD, while sixth place was Rakdos Midrange with a slight twist. So even though it's kind of a Demons deck, it looks more like a mid-range deck, and we'll talk about it in just a second and what demon it chose to highlight in its package. Seventh place was actually Azorius Control, yet another deck that seems like we talk about it every now and then, but hasn't really been putting up results in these challenges. And then eighth place was, of course, the 5-color Enigmatic Incarnation deck. A longtime Phoenix pilot O_Daniel Akos, well, I hope that's how you pronounce it, took the list to victory this challenge, not really changing up much since the stock list we'd seen a while ago. So kind of a trend between Phoenix and Green Devotion now is just the decks are in a better spot with the way the metagame is kind of played out. A couple of numbers in the list were tweaked around, so altogether we wound up having 3 Lightning Axes, 3 Fiery Impulse as some of our bigger removal spells, 1 Spell Pierce, 1 Torch the Tower as an exile removal spell, 1 Spike Field Hazard as a dual face land / removal spell, and 1 Into the Floodmaw combined with the namesake Arclight Phoenix and Artist Talent to get games rolling. Now in the sideboard, we did see 2 Annul to deal with the number of Unholy Annex, Enigmatic Incarnation decks, and just other problematic enchantments in general that the Phoenix deck sometimes has difficulty dealing with, while there is a split between a Brotherhood's End and a Pyroclasm in the sideboard for the sweepers of choice against aggro decks. 2 additional Brazen Borrower were also in the sideboard, allowing for the deck to add in an additional tempo threat that could bounce and then play offense and carry counters from a proseidetic memory very well if it needed to. Alright, let's take a moment to talk about the Onomatopoeia deck in the room, aka Mono Red THUD. Besides having probably one of the greatest names that we've heard in Pioneer for a little while, this mono red twist on what the Prowess decks were doing kind of went all in on the big thing thrown at your face strategy. Now this deck wound up running a bunch of the greatest hits from the Prowess decks, Monastery Swiftspear, Heartfire Hero, but also went more into the standard mono red version or standard kind of Gruul line style where it ran Cacophony Scam, but then also went into the Prowess package from Pioneer Wizards decks and took out Soul Scar Mage alongside adding in Kumano Faces Kakazan. Kind of deep cut is Wayward Guide Beast as an inverse Goblin Guide to get a 2/2 for 1 on the battlefield as soon as possible, and since most of our cards cost 1 mana, actually all of them in our main deck cost 1 mana, the throwing a land back in your hand is not really a downside to anything. There was also a plethora of pump spells. Indeed, there were 16 instants in the deck that did duty like Monstrous Rage, Turn Inside Out, Infuriate, Titan Strength, and a singleton copy of Built to Smash, which obviously there are not a ton of artifact creatures in their deck. Actually, there are none whatsoever, but still +3/+3 until end of turn for 1 mana is a great thing to have. And then of course there were 4 copies of the namesake card in the deck, THUD, which as a sorcery is basically the exact same thing that Burned Together is going to want to do for your deck. In the sideboard, we actually even had a couple of more pump spells like Dreadmaw's Ire, which of course can in a pinch just destroy an artifact as well if they're able to deal combat damage. Then just a bunch of kind of mono red removal sweep package things like Rending Volleys, End the Festivities, Torch the Tower, and then we also wound up putting in a little bit more from the sideboard to buff the deck up a little bit for longer games if they needed to happen, like non-1 mana cards like Urabrass Forge. There was Light Up the Stage, that I guess could be a 1 mana card if you really want to, and Valdarian Thrill Seeker as another way to fling things at your opponent. Now, one other thing that I forgot to mention at the beginning of talking about this deck is that this deck was actually an Obosh the Prey Piercer deck. So Obosh not only was able to deal more damage from all of your mono red threats, but it means that we are not able to play any of those 2 or 4 drops that you sometimes see in other red decks like Manifold Mouse or Emberheart Challenger. So trading those cards out for the Obosh the Prey Piercer may have kept the deck out of first place, but heck, the top 8 performance with a card named THUD, I'm here for it. Now, lastly on the weekend, I want to talk about that 6th place Rakdos deck that was using a different demon entirely to power its Unholy Annex, and that card was Abyssal Harvester, an almost instant win draft pick from the Foundation's limited format, and paired with Fear of Missing Out in order to recur threats like Shieldred the Apocalypse if we need them. Although not doing anything too unfair with this combination of cards, I think this deck is ripe for the breaking when we start looking at what other big, possibly demonic, preferably Rakdos things that we could be recurring as nightmares alongside our demons package. The rest of the deck played the straight up Rakdos mid-range game, even down to 3 sideboard Invoke Despairs and a pair of Reckoner Bankbusters to wind up playing the longer grindy games. So that's what was cooking this weekend. What's got your mouth watering, and what are you not even going to taste a little bit of? Let me know in the comments below what you're hungry to try out online or at your LGS. And while you're down there, give a thumbs up into the video if you're impressed with how many food-related lines I came up with there in that tiny little space. Of course, I did want to point out the join button just down below while you were looking there, which you can click to become one of my members, like these fine folks on screen who helped make this video and of course all the videos on my channel in total possible through their support. If you want access to perks like early video access, personal deck techs, and Discord access to chat it up with us, well, you're already by the button, so just click join. As always, you should tap that subscribe button to stay up to date on the latest deck techs, metagame analysis, and just in general magic content from me. See you next weekend.